Welcome to another edition of the Notes from Erin podcast. I'm so excited to be here today. And for today's podcast, I have a guest. I have author Randee Dawn. Can you give listeners a little bit of an introduction about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm normally a Brooklyn-based author and journalist. I've been an entertainment journalist for many years, but my true love was always writing books. So I have become a fantasy author in the last several years. I've got four books out now. Some are funny fantasy, some are dark fantasy, but they all are sort of contemporary and take place in the modern times. Like this is not Game of Thrones, sword and sorcery, epic type fantasy. So that's generally what I write, but I still continue to write for outlets like Variety and the Los Angeles Times and the Today Show website. A lot of writing. I also run a reading series based in Brooklyn called Brooklyn Books and Booze. And once a
So
month, we have
cute.
four authors. Yeah, and they come
Sorry.
in and they read. No, that's fine. Um, and I also have a course with creative counseling service. I always get I should know this, but I have a course called How to Be Interviewed, where I help people who have projects learn how to talk to the press, and that's all available on my website, which we will talk about later, I'm quite sure. But as I say, I'm normally Brooklyn based. This interview is happening while I am visiting New Zealand.
No, I have so many questions just from what you just said, but I guess I'll go to maybe like a first question since we are going to talk about your book. I guess for you, like, what is your earliest memory of being a reader? Like, what got you into reading?
Oh gosh, I mean, just having books around really helped. I mean, my grandmother gave me books, my mother gave me books. They were just around, and I think having them as part of the environment is super important to get kids to read. If they see you reading, if they see books around, they will read. So one of the first things I remember is there was one of those. Do you remember the golden books, that sort of hardcover book for kids that were slightly oversized, but they had like this stripe on the spine that was like this golden tape? And they used to call them little golden books.
Oh, that's so cute.
And I don't know if they make them anymore or if they only make them in ironic versions, because I've seen ironic versions like Leonard Bernstein, The Little Golden Book. But there was a book called So Big, and it was all about, this kid, I'm so big. And I practically memorized that. And I was really little at the time. And I just went on reading as many books as possible. I like to say the only time I really skipped school prior to high school was when I cut class to go to the library.
That's a cute reason to cut class. I mean, I guess
Yes.
not, but it is.
Well, I was that kind of nerd. So yeah, always been a reader, always been like just love to escape into different worlds, and that's what books have always done for me. It just fires up my imagination.
No, I love. And I guess that also makes me think about fantasy. So I know that you said you write a lot of fantasy, and even from your new book, it's fantasy. So I guess this could sound weird, but like I feel like fantasy, I feel like I'm seeing it a lot more than I have in the past. Like I know fantasy has always been a thing, but I've been seeing like a lot of romantic fantasy. Like, I don't know what you
Yeah,
call
romantasy,
romantasy.
as it's called. Right.
Like,
These
why do
these
you
marketing
think it
terms.
is having a resurgence right now? And I think also, like, going into that too, what is it about fantasy that you love writing about too?
Yeah, the resurgence in fantasy, I think, is at least 20 years old at this point, if not more, just because for a long time it was one of these niche categories, and everybody had a specific idea of what they thought fantasy was, which is all swords, sorcery, castles, dragons, that kind of thing. And that's fine, but that was kind of a niche area, and I think the people who read it were sort of considered to be, I mean, I'm fine with being a nerd, but like nerd used to not be a nice thing to be called. And it was the lighter version of somebody who, say, read science fiction. They're often lumped together because they talk about speculative worlds. And these days we often talk about speculative fiction, which includes science fiction, fantasy, and sometimes even horror, right? But I think one of the things that really, there were two things I would say that really caused the resurgence of fantasy, which is Hollywood all of a sudden could use CGI, which meant you could make these movies and these TV shows that looked really fantastic.
Hmm.
And then you had a couple of series of books that came out that really fueled Hollywood's imagination. Whether or not you agree with J.K. Rowling anymore, all the Harry Potter books were huge for both
Yeah.
readers and for Hollywood. And Game of Thrones, again, big series that just captured everybody's imagination. So like you had these two things come together, and you could make sci-fi look a lot better than just like some green screen spaceship going by or some fake looking plastic dragon, flying by or whatever. So I think That was part of it. The writing is just very different also now too. It grew up a little bit. It became more inclusive. It used to be it was just a bunch of white guys running around with swords, and you occasionally would have like a semi-naked woman who stood by them or whatever, and she might be green, and that was the extent of diversity. And I think you started seeing the field opening up more in diverse ways, so that more readers were being brought into the fold, and they were saying, "Oh, good, I'm seeing more of myself." So
Hmm.
that really started happening. And the whole, a lot of the, what people read these days also is a blend of a bunch of things. You mentioned
Yeah.
romantasy. So you have this romance books have a very specific structure and expectation. And there's a whole lingo that goes with romance readers. Putting romance tropes into fantasy allowed, it allowed to be like the chocolate with the peanut butter. You put peanut butter in my chocolate. And it was a great combination. And so people really love that. Sarah J. Maas put out a whole bunch of books, starting with A Court of Thorns and Roses. And that really just kind of introduced a lot of people to what fantasy readers for a long time had been seeing, but a lot of mass people who had not, mass people had not necessarily checked into. And so they were like, ooh,
Hmm.
fairies, romance in the court, what does this mean? And that really just opened things up. And there's a bunch of other reasons. We could spend the entire hour talking about why is fantasy more popular now? But on just a real shorthand, that's what I would say, is some of the main reasons. And I would also point out that starting in the 90s, which again is a long time ago already, you started having many more authors writing in a modern contemporary setting. Like, what if fairies were in our shopping malls,
Hmm.
or we're in rock bands, or what if they were part of the fabric but we didn't necessarily know it? And that's really what attracted me. I had not been a huge sword and sorcery fan of a lot of fantasy. I did read these books by Piers Anthony, which were full of puns and very goofy, and they took place in a magical land called Xanth, which begins with an
That's cool.
X, so Xanth. I loved that when I was like in middle school, and that was more or less it. And then I started discovering books later on that suggested that maybe the fairies were part of our fabric. And there's a book
Mhm.
by Emma Bull called The War of the Oaks, A War for the Oaks. That was wonderful. And that really brought me into the idea of like, ooh, I could do this. This is the sort of thing that I would write if I was writing fantasy. And why not? Let's get started. So that's really what kind of led me there.
No, I love because I do. Yeah, because I feel like I've been listening to different podcasts like within like maybe like the last 5 years or something where some of the people who run the podcast they're talking about some of the fantasy books that they like, but I think it's also a lot of like because they seem so normal, like
Hmm.
contemporary, like you said, and then I think also like some of them I know like that there's like levels of like smut included in some of them too, so it feels like
Right.
it's
Yeah.
more like normal and current day too.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. You can get a little more graphic. I just finished a book by a new author who's from New Zealand, T.R. Sharing, and it is a sort of retelling in an old-fashioned setting of The Little Mermaid. So it's not like she's made it contemporary. But I liked it. It was good. But what was interesting to me is that occasionally the characters would come out with swear words that are very modern, like the B word or the F word. And I'm like, I guess that's different than forsooth.
Yes.
That was interesting. But yeah, putting those elements into it is becoming much more common. And I think that that helps people identify also with the universe.
Mhm.
People like to separate sci-fi from fantasy. And again, this is a whole other discussion, but there's a lot of sci-fi that is basically fantasy also. I mean, I'm a huge Star Trek fan and it's grounded in science, but basically that's kind of a fantasy story too.
Well, yes. I was gonna say that because my stepmom, she's a Trekkie, but she's like very, very much, and she reads a lot of sci-fi, but she doesn't read as much fantasy. But I think she would really like fantasy if she dipped more into it too.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you're putting the aliens, fairies, like one's on a planet, one's already on our planet, like there are definite parallels. If you like one, you might like the other.
Hmm. Well, and then I guess too. So you said you started reading fantasy later. Like, what were you reading before you were reading fantasy?
I read a lot of Judy Blume, a lot of coming of
Love.
age books. I mean, who doesn't like Judy Blume? I read kind of whatever I could get my hands on at the library. And there's an author named Robert Cormier who I really liked. He wrote a book that I think some people have to read in school called The Chocolate War. So I was reading very traditional, with the equivalent of YA stuff. But I'm also a child of the East and grew up in a time when we really thought the world was going to get nuclear bombed at any moment. So I started drifting into these post-apocalyptic books or these end of civilization books. And there wasn't a ton for YA readers. There's much more now. There was a book called The Girl Who Owned a City, and like there was some disease and it knocked out everybody who was over the age of 12. So now you have 12-year-olds running the
Oh
world.
no.
As a 12-year-old at the time,
That
like
was
that was very,
fascinating.
I was like, okay, I like this. How are we going to do this? So, but that kind of was a back door. It's a very short walk from post-apocalyptic end of civilization to, say, zombies or, sci-fi
Hmm.
civilization collapse, right? So I sort of feel that was my back door into speculative fiction in the first place, and I just started reading it from there.
Hmm.
And then in terms of fantasy, like I said, I didn't think about the contemporary aspect of it, but then when I stumbled on a certain number of books and I became friends with fantasy authors, and I was like, oh, look, these are the possibilities. It doesn't have to just be this binary ABC that you've always thought it was going to be. And that was really exciting for me. I had come up with this idea. I really got into Irish fairy and folklore, really kind of accidentally. I stumbled upon this book that had been compiled by the poet Yeats way back at the end of the 18th century, the 19th century, and it had all these great folk tales about that came out of Irish tradition, where he had gone around the country and basically talked to all these locals in rural towns and said, "Tell me your stories. I'll buy you a beer or whatever." And he compiled all of this, and he included a description about a fae that I hadn't seen anywhere else called the Leanhan She. That's in Irish, Leanhan She, which means fairy mistress. And the fairy mistress is kind of this combination of vampire succubus. She inspires the poets to write beautiful, magical things, but then she sort of steals their soul at the same time. So, this is why all the poets die young. And at the time, I was doing a lot of music journalism, and I thought, well, what if that fairy showed up in our world today? Like, she might hang out with poets, because of course we still have great poets, but I think she'd hang out with rock musicians. And since I
Hmm.
was doing all this music journalism, I was able to put in sort of the backstagey, how the sausage gets made feel of being on a tour bus and being in a rock band. And that was probably my first real foray into writing contemporary. They sometimes call it urban fantasy, but doesn't have to be in an urban setting. It can be anywhere. And that was really kind of my first attempt, but I didn't know who to show it to anybody. I didn't know who to show it to. I didn't know anybody else was writing this really, or that
Hmm.
anybody I could access. So it kind of sat around for a while. But that book, which I called The Only Song Worth Singing, that ended up coming out last year. Like, it took so long and so many rewrites, and I finally showed it to people. But that book is about this scary fairy who chases after an Irish rock band touring in the US for the first time. And I wanted to see how that would play out. Once you attract the attention of this magical creature, how do you get rid of her before she kills you? And it just felt like it just kind of all fell together very naturally. So that was really probably the first real contemporary fantasy that I wrote. I just loved that character. And I've gone on from there. I'm an entertainment journalist, so there's a lot of TV and film that I've been writing about for the past couple decades. And my first novel that came out, which came out in 2022, is called Tune In Tomorrow. And that is about a reality TV show run by mythical creatures for mythical creatures, but starring humans. And it's very silly and punny. Like the rock star one is darker because, stealing your soul, that's a dark thing, right? But this one was very silly and backstagey and funny and full of puns, and I loved that. And I just talked a lot about being backstage on a TV show. And it's kind of a soap opera reality show, like the
Hmm.
Kardashians or Selling Sunset or something like that. So it's not a competitive reality show, but it let me introduce all these folklore characters and creatures along with the humans that are on the show. And there's an All About Eve situation that's going on where the diva of the show doesn't want the new actress to be on there or to steal her spotlight. So that was a lot of fun. And then the publishers liked it enough that they wanted two more in the same universe. So although all these are standalones, my most recent book, We Interrupt This Program, is the next one in that universe and kind of takes place in this magical, cozy mystery town.
No, I love how you described all of that because I was also curious, like how your background as like a music journalist and also how your background in entertainment journalism, how they came into like how you wrote, because I was a previous music journalist like a few years ago, so I used to do a
Hmm.
lot of like interviews and a lot of reviews and going to concerts and stuff like that. So
Yeah, you
I
see, so
was curious.
you've seen the crazy, like you've been back there. You see what that's like, right?
Yeah, and it's fun. So like I could see it as a story or like writing it. So I was curious like how you integrate so much of your previous experience into writing books, and I guess also like from your previous experience, what made you want to get into starting to write books?
I've always written books, actually. Writing books was the first and only thing I really wanted to do from when I was a kid. Basically, I was writing about my stuffed animals when I was
That's so
really
cute.
little. I would play with them and come up with stories for them, and then I'd go, oh, I got to write that one down. So I've been writing for a very long time, but I was also very and I think this is tough for a lot of writers, is that your ego gets so bound up with what you're writing that it makes it hard to change anything. I mean, we all know intellectually that writing the first draft or writing a draft of anything is not the perfect finished version. But we kind of want it to be because it's like, no,
Yes.
why would there be anything wrong with this? And it just took me a really long time to get over that fear of that, to separate the product, the thing that I wrote from the who I am,
Mhm.
because I showed some early work to some people and they were like, no, this is wrong, or you should do it this way or whatever. And I was devastated. I'm like, oh, I'm a terrible writer. I'm never gonna. So it
No.
just took a very long time for me to show it to anybody. But I was always writing. I was writing
Mhm.
fanfic. I was writing short stories for myself. Eventually, I figured I would find the courage to send it out properly. And then when the internet became a real thing, that changed the game for a lot of writers in a ton of ways, not just the publishing side of things, but before the internet, if you wanted to contact an agent, if you wanted to contact a publisher, you either had to know somebody,
Mhm.
or there was this big, thick book that came out once a year called The Writer's Market. And in very, very tiny, almost like, you need a magnifying glass text, they would list every single publisher, every single agent, and say, this is what they're looking for, and this is the address, and this is who you should contact, and everything. And it was so daunting because you'd start at A and you'd be like, okay, and then it was hundreds of pages. And when you finally found somebody you wanted to send this out to, you had to print it out, you had to get stamps, you had to put it in an envelope. You often had to have like a self-addressed stamped envelope in there so that they could reply back to you.
Mhm.
And it was costly. I didn't have a printer. I didn't have the money for all of this kind of stuff. I was really trying to do this. I was trying to do this on as much of a budget as I could. I would print out stuff at my job to send out. But the internet really changed that because you didn't have to print anything out. You didn't have to have self-addressed stamped envelopes. You could email this stuff out. You still had to be careful who you were sending it to, but you could research that on the internet too. So that changed it for me in a lot of ways too, because I could be a little more free about sharing this work around. And then I just started going to conventions and meeting more writers and meeting more writers who had been published. And I joined a group called Broad Universe, which is still exists. It's a networking group for female and female identifying and non-binary writers, mostly of speculative fiction, but not all. And meeting them was really a turning point for me because I suddenly saw I saw different people at different stages of their process. I saw people who had been traditionally published, who were doing self-publishing, who were maybe still working toward publishing. I saw how people marketed things. I could ask them, like I had a great hive mind to refer to. And so that really was a big stepping point, a big jumping off point for me to feel more confident about sharing my work and getting and understanding how to use feedback. And so that was a big deal for me. And it's one of these things. I was talking about this with my husband the other night. It's like we talk about, oh, everything's fated. Things are fated to happen. Well, nothing happens if you don't leave your house, right? You have to sort of make the thing happen as well. So if I'd
Mhm.
never gotten over my fear, if I'd never stepped outside and started interacting with other writers and seeing how other people did things, none of this would have happened. So I give a lot of credit to Broad Universe and also some of the other authors I met along the way. There are some great authors like Ellen Kushner and Delia Sherman. And if you're a fantasy reader, they are wonderful, wonderful writers, but they are also two of these women out there who are just kind of they're like they create a salon wherever they go. They just open themselves up and say, how can I help you? Let me read your work. I'll tell you, who you should talk to. And so knowing this is where the networking part of it comes in. But meeting writers and being out in the world of all of that really just supercharges everything after that, because you also see how some people don't do it right. You're like, oh, okay, I know what not to do now as well as what to do. So yeah, I don't even remember the question, but that was my answer.
Well, no, I think that is true because I think one thing that I've gathered from you, just from our conversation, is how community kind of comes around your stuff. So, like for writing, how you say, like, you work with the other writers and they kind of give you feedback and you have that community. And then I think also for your book club,
Oh yeah,
it's a
the readings.
boost
It's actually a reading series. It's not a book
reading
club,
series.
but yeah, I see what you're saying. You know, once you've done it long enough, one of the things that really helps is to sort of find a way to give back.
Mhm.
And I stumbled into doing this reading series very accidentally. Did not plan on making a reading series, but I thought to myself, I would love to give more of a platform for my friends to read in front of groups.
Mhm.
It's not just how you sell books, but it's become you have how you become more confident talking in front of groups, how you can become more confident about reading your own work aloud. And, you know, selfishly, it gave me a place to read aloud whenever I felt like it. It's like, oh, I can program myself if I feel like it. But it's a lot of people I know in our speculative fiction community don't just write, right? They do write, and that's a whole process. And there's nothing wrong if that's the thing that you're putting your heart into. But eventually, I see a lot of people who set up online readings, or they do convention specific things, or they do presentations about how to better query. The other thing Brooklyn Books and Booze has started doing recently, we did it earlier this year, we're going to do it in September, is we're going to do a book fair. And I want it to be all independent authors, you know, people who are on very small publishers or who are self-publishing, and who can come out and sell their books. Because there's once you do this long enough, you realize that you feel like, oh, everybody ought to know this stuff already. People ought to know that these books are out there. And there's this huge world that has
Yeah.
no idea at all that a lot of other wonderful authors that you can't necessarily find on the eye level shelf at Barnes and Noble are out there. And there's so much great reading to be done that doesn't have to be something that's on the New York Times bestseller list.
Yeah.
Go with God on all of those folks. Fine. They don't need my help. The people that we really want to elevate are the people who are just as good, but haven't gotten the magic fairy who showed up and said, "I'll put all your books in Barnes and Noble," kind of thing. So I like doing that. I like giving back to the community because I feel like I've gotten so much from our community as well.
No, and I could see it too, especially like as your background as a writer too. Like a lot of writing is getting feedback on your writing. So I feel like it's also a way for them to get feedback in real time too. And then also be able to have the community when their stuff comes out because I think it kind of gives you both things at one time.
Yeah, a lot of people have writers groups and they have a regular passing back and forth of materials and critiques. I might be joining a new writers group. I'm still waiting to hear
I
back on
love.
that one, but I do have a lot of friends and I will sometimes put out. I've just finished writing a short story that's going to go in an anthology that's all about werewolves and were creatures.
I love.
I have a character in Tune In Tomorrow who is a were-panther. She writes the scripts for the show, and her name is Emma. But I wanted to do something with her for this anthology. So I have this short story that I've just finished, but I wanted to show it to people because, once again, my first draft might look good to me, but it's kind of like you think you look good, and then you go out and somebody says to you, "Oh, you got something in your teeth." Like you thought you were the bomb, and you go out there and you're like,
And you were not.
that's all anybody looked at was my teeth. So you need somebody out there who you can show your work to, who will tell you when you have something in your teeth, or that, you know,
Hmm.
you got your shirt on backwards, or this is what's wrong with this story. So I have a couple of people out there who are reading the story, and I've already gotten feedback from them very quickly, and the story is due in May. But that's the, being part of the community, and they know that they could come to me and say, "Hey, I've got a short story. Do you mind reading it?" So you can't do everything for everybody, but that's how everybody helps. Takes a village.
Yeah. No, and I think that's true because I feel like writing a book is something that's on my to-do list. It's something that
Hmm.
I've been working on, but I think sometimes because of being a writer in the past, like writing newsletters and writing for magazines is so different than writing such a long piece of content. So I think I'm overwhelmed by the thought of it before I do it.
Yeah, I hear
So
that. I hear that.
like kind of how was your well, I guess how what was your process for that? And then also for we interrupt the program. I feel like you've already kind of given a synopsis of the book, but
Hmm.
if you could give like another synopsis or like a background on the book because I thought it was so interesting. And I think also, too, when I first saw the snapshot, it was like older women solving mysteries. Like, I just thought it was really interesting, just some of the characters and things that happened within the book.
Yeah, I think, well, first, I'll take the first part and then I'll get to the we interrupt the program, this program part. The thing about writing a book is everybody is going to do it different, right? So your process does not have to mimic anybody else's. For me, for many years, I used to like create this movie in my head and then I'd start writing the movie. Do you know what I mean? Like not a script, but like I already had a lot of it going on in my head already. There are plenty of people who do outlines. They say, okay, in chapter one, these things are going to happen. In chapter two, these things are going to happen. And once they get the outline, they go back and they start doing that. And I think everybody knows that the outline will change as you write
Yeah.
it because you're more into the story and you understand things you didn't understand before. But a lot of people work that way. So there's people who are called pantsers, like they do it by the seat of their pants. They don't write the outline. And then there are outliners who are a little more organized with the process. Um, so anybody, it is a big, overwhelming task. And once
Yeah.
again, you're going to write tens and tens and tens, if not hundreds of thousands of words in the course of doing a novel, because you're going to finish the draft, you're going to let it sit, and then you got to go back and do it again. Because one of the most valuable pieces of information I ever got is that the first draft is you telling yourself the story, right? You discover the
Hmm.
story as you get into it, meet your characters. You're like, okay, I have character one and character two. That's great. Oh, but wait a minute. They're actually like in my subconscious brain is making them interact in a different way than I expected them to. And that's actually a really fun part of the process because that's almost like the storytelling itself. And you cannot force it. If you try to force it, it's just not going to work. So but that means that you are going to have flaws and plot holes and things that don't work when you get to the end of that story, and you have to go back and sort of let it sit for a minute, let it marinate, and then you go back and you check it out again a second time, and then eventually you show it to other people who will then say, this is an issue, or this didn't work for me, or here's some pacing, and then you go back and you do it a third time. So like it's overwhelming, but you take it in little chunks. You do a little bit
Hmm.
here and a little bit here, a little bit here every day, and then eventually you have something at the end. I find it very overwhelming sometimes when I will sit down and want to say something and just not know the entry point or where I'm going with it. And but it's about yeah, in We Interrupt This program, which again takes place in this town that was created by magical creatures, but it's kind of like all these cozy mysteries happen in this one town. Think of how in Murder, She Wrote, Jessica
Hmm.
Fletcher is solving way more murders or way more mysteries than would make sense for her tiny little seaside town. That's kind of the fun part of the trope, right?
Yeah.
So I wanted to have the idea that these magical creatures say, well, we want to have a bunch of cozy mysteries that we can make movies about rather than assembling a cast every time. Let's just create a whole village, populate it with humans, and have somebody who's writing books slash scripts. This older woman character who's Winnie in my book, and we will make movies based on her stories that feature all of our residents of the town. And that's what they've been doing. In We Interrupt This program, what happens is that stops working. Okay, the only magical creature in the town is what's called a Seelie. Now, in Irish and Celtic folklore, they have the Seelie court, which is these high level fairies who run everything and have a very powerful magic. And I had this idea, and this shows up in Tune In Tomorrow also, of the Seelie Court Network. So they actually now created their own television network and they make all these TV shows and programs. And they have these little trope town villages. And the village in this town is called Seaview Haven. And so what they do is they have one fairy who lives in town. He's like the showrunner, he's the director, and he's the mayor all at once. And he just stops coming out of his house. And people are like, what happened? It's not a huge secret, and you find out fairly early on, but the muses are involved, the Greek muses. They decided to go on a galcation and they went to the town and things just stopped working all of a sudden. So now the big mystery is to uncover why this happened and then how to fix it. And so you have all these crazy characters who show up to do that. Um, but to go back to what I was talking about writing stories is when you start writing regularly, if you sit down an hour a day or however long, you kind of wake up the muse in your head because then when you're not writing and you're interacting with the world, there's a subconscious part of your brain, or maybe not even so subconscious, that looks at things and says, oh, I could put that in the book. Or wait a minute, that's how I could solve that problem. It's kind of like you have this little muse living in your head that because you've poked her and woken her up and said, we have a project to put together, we'll start giving you feedback and ideas and things that and solve problems for you, so that when you sit back down, you have things to write about. And I love. I know that's very airy fairy sounding, but when you start writing a book, that's really kind of how it feels.
No, and it doesn't sound airy fairy. Maybe I'm a fairy, I don't know. But it does not
Maybe we
seem
all
that
are.
way. Because I think like one of the things that I liked when I was reading it, it was a fun book to me, but then I think also like seeing the character development and how quirky the characters were. And I think how you said you start seeing things and how like things come to you as you are just kind of like living your life, because I remember I went to the National Book Festival in DC, and James McBride was there, and he said that what he does when he's writing a book, he'll go on the train and just listen to conversations and write down conversations that he hears in his notebook. So I think it's kind of like the same. Like I think maybe because you know that you are working on something, maybe you're observing things in a different way than you would not.
Yeah, it's like you're heightened. You've got this
Mhm.
heightened awareness of the world that maybe is a little more external, that you're bringing internally, that then you sort of process and can show up in your books. My husband likes to say that nobody's safe around a writer.
That's true.
Anything you hear or see may be used against you or for you in the court of my
Mhm.
book, and it's true. I love the names that jump out to me. I'll write down a name and use it later. And just, friends of mine, there's a friend of mine who inspired the Winnie character in the book, who is sort of this wonderful author who has this wonderful silver hair, and she's a good friend of mine. The character's not her,
Yeah.
but that was sort of the visual inspiration at first. So the world filters into your book. And when you have this expertise, like I have this expertise for backgrounds in TV and movies and music and all that, you take those pieces as well and you filter that in. And it weaves together something that hopefully feels exciting to read, but also maybe a little grounded and realistic. And it's like, oh, I can see, I can see this happening. It has features that are real as well as fantastic. And that's what resonates, hopefully, with the reader.
No, and I think it does. And I think like also because for this book, how you said you did an outline, like when and how you said that Winnie was based on one of your friends, like how did you develop the people? Like did you well, I guess you're not outlining that, but how do you keep the people together, if that makes I don't know if that makes sense as a question, but
Well, I had this was one of these ones where I had a concept
mhm.
because I'd written Tune In Tomorrow, which is about a TV show. But when the publishers said they wanted more books, I was like, well, I don't want to do another TV show based one. I want to have a slightly larger world. And I think another friend of mine was talking about she went to a very small town in Vermont and was walking down the street and she's like, all right, I'm ready for my Hallmark movie where, I'm in the right town, like what's going on? And I just started thinking, well, what if all the Hallmark movies were made in one town?
Mhm.
It had 80 bakeries for, 500 residents or something, and everything was painted beautifully and it was very cute and twee, right? And then I thought, well, that's a trope. What if there were just dozens of these trope towns that were sort of magically created by magical creatures who want to watch human interactions in movies? And if you just had this sort of hermetically sealed village where all these cute little romantic stories were always happening, then they could just tune into the rom-com channel or whatever.
Yeah.
And the next book in this universe, which is going to be called Don't Touch That Dial, does
Oh, that's
have
cute.
that sort of hallmark town. That's one of the towns that we're going to be visiting in that universe. So that's coming up next year. But in terms of coming up with what story I wanted to tell, the cozy mystery village really stuck with me in terms of just propelling the plot and taking us along. So then it became a matter of, right, well, of course we have to have our author who writes the cozy mysteries and who solves the mysteries. And she should have a best friend who is maybe the sheriff in town, and they sort of work together, but a sort of clash here and there.
Yeah.
But they're humans. Like, were they friends before they came to town or not? Then I just started thinking, well, who else is going to work to populate this? Who's going to be the antagonist? Who's going to make things worse? And by bringing in a magical unseelie creature, the unseelies are the ones who deconstruct, who cancel, who like to tear things apart. This one unseelie character who decides, I want to go in and tear down this village. Let's bring him in with an assistant who doesn't want to be with him. A lot of what works in a story is you have an idea and then you have to find ways that are going to break that idea because you have to create a problem and then you have to create a way to solve it. And there's another good piece of advice that I heard a long time ago, which is you have to put your characters in the place they least want to be. If you have a character who's constantly winning, solving all the problems, always in the right place at the right time, like that's readable, but that's actually
It's
kind of bland.
boring.
It's boring, exactly. You have to have a character who's got a problem, and then she's got to have a bigger problem. It's
Hmm.
the way in which she solves the problems or has other people help her solve the problems is the meat of the story. That's where you get to the heart of things. So by having our main writer Winnie all of a sudden having writer's block, well, that's a place she doesn't want to be. She's in her favorite magical town that she did volunteer to join, but things aren't working. She can't find her boyfriend. He's not there anymore. Her best friend has disappeared. Like these are all these things that are terrible.
Hmm.
So by putting somebody in the place they least want to be, that's where you get conflict and that's where you get character development. So for me, it was more like, what does this story need? Where am I going next? We've got to present the problem. How do we summarize the problem? And then now we meet our characters. And I love the idea that there's a couple of teenage lovebirds who are in there also, who are kind of Scooby ganging their way through the story. Also, I wanted to do something that would appeal to a lot of people. I didn't want a
Yeah.
story that would just be for adults or just be for YA or anything. And I think anybody really can read this book. It's not for little kids, I think, but that's not because there's some big sex
Yeah.
scene or people are swearing all over the place. It's more just the content. But I liked the idea that you could have teenagers and older people working together. Um, and it didn't have to just be the hero savior showing up and fixing everything.
Mhm.
So that was important to me too. My agent, actually not my agent, my editor who had edited Tune In Tomorrow had posted something coincidentally as I was putting this together about what she wanted to see in books. And one of it was like the gray haired lady who is, solving mysteries and a couple of the things that she mentioned, the found family concept, where it's not just your brothers and sisters, but you make your family. And it was great because those are all things I was already planning for We Interrupt This program. And they all came together, I think, pretty well. And there's just stuff that surprised me in my rewrites that I didn't even plan.
No, I think it was a fun read. Like I think it was just so much. Like I liked how you said like the lovebird. Sorry, like the teens. Like I think it was enough quirky people. It was enough things going on too. And I do think, like you said, like the advice. I don't think I ever really thought about that. If everything is going well for a character, you don't want to read that because it's kind of like okay, like it could have just been a page.
Yeah. Well, this is why, we get to happily ever after, but there is no happily ever after, really. I mean, there's always going to be the next problem on the
Hmm.
horizon. And you got to stop the book at some point. But you can imagine that, yeah, knowing these characters, things will go well a little while, and then something
Yeah.
else is going to break. But now you have the confidence that they, having met them, having gone through adventures, that they can solve the next adventure. And hey, I might want to know what that adventure is.
Hmm.
We Interrupt This program has a couple of characters that showed up in Tune In Tomorrow. Now, it's not critical that you've read Tune In Tomorrow, but the characters of Laurel and Hardy who show up in We Interrupt This program who want to help tear down the town. There's kind of like the celebrity unseelies who cancel towns. They show up in Tune In Tomorrow toward the end. And the executives over at the Sealy Court Network, there's at least one of them who shows up. And then there's the character of Janus, who is the Greek god of change and gates and various other things. They show up in Tune In Tomorrow also. So it's like, again, not critical. These are like little Easter eggy things if you've read the first book that you'll enjoy here. But I like the idea that they all live in this same universe and some of them know one another and may show up in various places. And Don't Touch That Dial, we've got a couple who show up again.
I was going to ask, do you have any that show up in that book?
Yeah, again, not major players. I don't want people to feel like they missed out on something. But for example, there's a couple of characters in Don't Touch That Dial who accidentally stumble their way onto the Tune In Tomorrow set. So
Hmm.
they're actually filming a scene. They show up. They're not supposed to be there. They are mistaken for extras on the show, and there's a complete disaster while they're there. They like fall into a fountain, and then like cut, cut. But again, you don't have to have had read Tune In Tomorrow. So that shows up, and then there's a couple of other characters who do show up here and there. Again, it's to give the world texture and feel like you know something that maybe readers who haven't gotten to the other books don't know. There's a great author named Terry Pratchett who did a ton of books in a shared universe world called Discworld. It's all in this same flat earth sort of world that's being supported by turtles and elephants and all of that, but they happen in different villages or different towns or different eras, and you'll hear references to one book as a historical document, or maybe a character will cross over, but it's not critical that you have read them in any particular order. And that's, aside from the fact that he's hilarious, he's a wonderful, funny writer. That's kind of what I have in mind with my Tune In Tomorrow. We call it the Tuniverse books.
No, I don't like that, especially as a reader. Like when I read a book and I know some of the characters from something else that I read, it makes the
Mm-hmm.
book more enjoyable to me. So I'm like, I kind of already know them. So then you kind of get the vibe of the book a little bit better, I think.
Yeah, well, you feel like you're part of the community already. It's like, oh
Hmm.
yeah, I met those people. Yeah, I know those people
Hmm.
too. Yeah, let's come on and hang out again.
No, I love that. And then I think one other thing that was curious about, like, about your universe too, is I think all of the titles, I feel like they are very descriptive into what the books are. So, like for you, what is the process for how you select the title of the book?
So for the Tuniverse books, I wanted to use old-fashioned television phrases. So tune in tomorrow is a phrase that they used to say at the end of soap operas. What's will Jane and Michael marry? Tune in tomorrow and find
Yes.
out. And that just sort of, because Tune In Tomorrow started out as more of like a soap opera thing, then it became more of a reality thing. But it still worked, right? It's like, what's going to happen on this show? Tune in tomorrow. We Interrupt This Program makes sense because the movies have stopped being filmed. There's a
Hmm.
break. The showrunner isn't coming out of his house. What's going on? So the whole programming from this trope town has been interrupted. Initially, there's another phrase called "pardon the interruption," which is a little more British. And I thought about "pardon the interruption," but I think "We Interrupt This Program" is much more solidly
Hmm.
American there. So I stuck with that. And then "Don't Touch That Dial" does work because the characters in Don't Touch That Dial have discovered a device that allows them to jump from trope town to trope town to trope town. So they're kind of like tuning the dial as they go. And I know dial isn't even something we have on TVs anymore. It's all remote controls and buttons and things. But
Well, the
if you
dial
look
is this thing.
yeah, exactly. Like if you look at the covers of the book and you see the old-fashioned TV on the book cover, you used to be you had to dial, change the channel by using
Yes.
a dial. And I love the idea. What I really loved the idea was that the old-fashioned technology devices that we have, the way remote controls used to look, or the way we used to have VCRs and all of that, that those would be kind of like magic devices to magic creatures because they don't understand technology. There's a whole thing about fairies are not supposed to touch iron. There's all this stuff that's been pre-established. I liked the idea that these would be our own magic items because we know how to use wires and clips and
Hmm.
electricity in a way that they know how to use magic. So like these devices have made their way over into the magic universe, but they're kind of like in museums and underneath glass because it's like, oh, look at this strange device. We don't know what it does, but it's interesting. So when the human characters stumble on it, it's like, oh, well, they make it work because that's the human magic. There's a quote from the author Arthur C. Clarke, who wrote 2001: A Space Odyssey, among many other things. And I'm going to miss this is not the exact quote, but it's something along the lines of sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Like if you don't know how the technology works, it may as well be magic. And
Hmm.
that really fueled me for Don't Touch That Dial because it allowed these technological things that the humans, they know what they are, they sort of know what they are, they can make them work,
Hmm.
but the magic creatures can't. So they kind of have something over the magic creatures. And that allows them to travel from town to town to town and see how the whole universe really works.
Oh, I
So,
love.
so yeah, when we're talking about the dial, there is like they used to have actually on a remote control, they would have a dial also. If you go and Google like, retro remote controls, there would be dials on those things. It'd be like buttons for hue or color or, it's really cool looking retro stuff. And that's why we wanted to have the old TVs on the covers of these books. It's the same TV on both the Tune In Tomorrow and We Interrupt This Program books. but it's being affected in different ways and is surrounded
Hmm.
by different elements of each story.
No, I love. And then I guess, well, we could end with like a fun round. It'll keep you on your toes. It
Not
probably
a
will not keep
fun
you on your toes.
round. No. Yes, some fun rounds are fun.
I don't think it will keep you on your toes, but I guess one we'll start with if you had to give people one quick reason why they should read We Interrupt This Program, but then also read from your universe as well, what would that be?
I think it's just a chance to rethink how you see the world. Once you've imagined that there are fairies out there or that they're making their own TV shows and movies, it kind of changes the concept of what entertainment really can be and what it's supposed to do for us. Entertainment, when we watch movies and TV shows, they are lies. They are fictional stories. Books are lies, right? And there's a lot of truthiness and fakery and AI nonsense going on right now. But when you volunteer to watch a movie or read a book or see a TV show, you are volunteering to go into that world and you can choose to understand it how you want to understand it. And I think that when you accept that these stories may have more to tell you, when you accept that you know that it's not a real thing, but it could be a real thing. I don't know if that's a bunch of gobbledygook or not. That was a
No,
good question.
I think that's good. And then let's see, from your music background, if you had to, well, okay, this is twofold. So I know that some people write with like a music, like with music, like a playlist. So if you are one of those people, what is a song on your playlist? And if you were not one of those people, what would be a song or album on a playlist that you would write with, or think you think that would be a good companion?
Well, I don't actually write with music. My brain wants to follow the music, so it
Yeah.
doesn't follow the story. I've tried it with even like instrumental stuff, but my brain is just like, "Oh, music, oh, shiny," and that doesn't work for me. I totally get it that people do though. Very early on when I was writing my stuff in my head, I would listen to the radio or I would listen to my music that I just had on shuffle or something. And I would let the music sort of help guide the story because certain songs would go certain ways. And I actually would stitch together quite a lot of songs that could kind of like, if there was a musical version of this book, these songs would be on it. So I,
Hmm.
I actually do have collections of songs that could be played in the movie version as background or as a
Oh, I
musical
love.
version of some of these books that I've written, not so much the Tuniverse ones. So it really it's very scene specific, but one thing I will say, there's a lot of soundtrack music really
Hmm.
fuels me, and it's meant to do that. The Presumed Innocent soundtrack by John Williams has some wonderful. Presumed Innocent, I mean the movie, not the miniseries that they made recently. That was really good for my energy. And there's an old movie called The Last Seduction that came out in the 1990s. It has a really cool jazzy soundtrack to it, and that's another one that really fuels me. So for me, it's about soundtracks that can really get the imagination going because you can kind of set yourself into this liminal area where you're half there and half not.
I like that because I think too when I think of soundtracks, because you like if you see a movie for instance and you remember the soundtrack, I think whenever I hear the song, I can think of a scene. So
Hmm.
I think it's kind of maybe a little bit the same as you're saying,
Yeah,
slightly.
everybody reacts to it differently.
Hmm.
But I do have some soundtracks for books that actually have not been published.
Okay.
Ever wanted to, if that book ever comes out, I have a whole Spotify list I could make.
No, I like that. And then I guess last question, I'll give you a New Zealand question. So I know you're
Okay.
in New Zealand now, and before the call, you said that it's a place that you think everyone should add to their list. I guess for
Hmm.
you, what are two reasons why you think people should add New Zealand to their list from your travels so far?
Um, Well, for one thing, it is breathtakingly gorgeous, especially the South Island. There's just a lot of unspoiled landscape that you've never seen before. It's very green in a lot of places, but it's just majestical in a lot of ways. I mean, there's a reason they filmed The Lord of the Rings down here, right? So that's one reason. But the people are super nice, and it's a country. I like to say it's a country that works. You feel safe here. You feel like people are behaving like good citizens. You don't feel as though there's mendacity or, animosity so much. And there is to a certain extent. And you didn't ask for a third reason, but the third reason I would say is that the local Maori culture, the Polynesian folk who came over here many hundreds of years ago and who settled before the white colonists showed up, They are very well integrated here. They run their own businesses. You're not seeing what I feel. And again, this is from my perspective. I could be completely wrong. It doesn't feel like an exploitative thing. It feels like they are owning their own history here and presenting it to people who visit and explaining it. A lot of the names of places are both English, but also slash Maori. And so you're sort of learning it side by side. So for me, those are reasons that are worth coming to New Zealand. It's beautiful. It's well integrated in terms of the cultures that are side by side, and the people are just really.
I love. Now, I'm going to add it to my list. Like I told you, some of my favorite musicians are from there because I also feel
Mhm.
like Leisure is from New Zealand. I didn't think about that before, but
Oh yeah, that's possible. Other bands that are a little older than that, you could look up a band called Split Ends,
hmm,
ENZ, or the Verlaines. Both of those
okay.
are from New Zealand.
Perfect. Well, thank
Yeah.
you so much, Randee. And
Well,
if
thank you so
people,
much for having me.
thank you. And if people want to get in contact with you, how do they do?
The best place to find me is at randeedawn.com. And Randee is spelled with two E's, so randeedawn.com. I've got old articles there. I've got links to all my books, all my short stories, places you can buy them. I do a little bit of blogging, but not a whole lot. And there's also links to my How to Be Interviewed courses, as well as how to find out more about Brooklyn Books and Booze. So yeah, randeedawn.com for all your needs, Randee Dawn.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. Hold
Thank
on.
you so much for having me, Erin. This has been terrific.
Thank you.